In 1990, a woman named Tina was driving alone in America when she noticed a blue sedan with the plate number 2FAN321 following her. She got really scared and stepped on the gas, trying to find help at the closest inn, but there was no one around. The blue sedan also stopped at the inn, and the driver got out with a dagger and duct tape. Terrified, Tina ran to the empty land behind the inn, and the man followed her. Thankfully, she was able to escape by getting help from a passing truck driver. A couple weeks later, Deputy Sheriff Joe Deacon from Kern County Sheriff's Office was asked by his boss to pick up some bloody boots as evidence of a murder from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Deacon used to work there for about 15 years and was well known as a top cop until he got transferred to Bakersfield 5 years ago. When Deacon got to LA, he found out that the Homicide Division, led by Captain Ferris, still needed to check the item. They told him to stick around until it was done the next day. While he was there, he caught up with some old work buddies and met a detective named Jimmy, who was working on a serial murder case with 4 victims, but they still didn't know who did it, even though the first murder happened 2 months ago. After the press conference that morning, Jimmy headed to the crime scene with his partner, Detective Sal, and another detective. They also asked Deacon to come along and check out the crime scene. The murder happened in an apartment, and the victim was a stunning girl named Julie. She was left naked, her wrists tied with wire, her head wrapped in white plastic, and blood splattered everywhere. Deacon checked out the room in the building opposite the apartment, with a window facing the crime scene. It looked like the culprit may have used that room to spy on Julie because it was empty and had a chair right in front of the window. He went quiet as he looked at Julie's body from a distance, which reminded him of a past murder case he couldn't crack. 2 naked girls with white plastic over their faces, propped up against a big rock. Rhonda, the woman with the red hair clip, went home by herself after jogging with her boyfriend. A brown car followed her, and she hasn't been seen since. The next day, Deacon's boss said they didn't need to take the evidence to Bakersfield. Then Jimmy asked Deacon to watch the interrogation of a guy named Stan who had a shady criminal history. People said he was caught twice spying on Julie from a building near the crime scene. Stan straight up said he wasn't involved in the case, but when Jimmy mentioned Mary, Stan got all twitchy like he knew Deacon was watching. So Jimmy told his crew to figure out what's going on between Stan and Mary. Meanwhile, Rhonda's parents went to the police because she was missing. Instead of heading back to Bakersfield after wrapping up his business in LA, Deacon decided to pay a visit to his colleague Flo, who was conducting an autopsy on Julie. So far, Flo had found a bite mark on Julie's cheek, mouthwash residue in her mouth, and evidence that someone had shaved Julie's leg after she died. Plus, Julie had eaten a big meal before she was killed. Based on the way the murders were carried out, it looked like Julie might be the 5th victim in the case. Flo thought that the person who killed Julie might have come back to the crime scene a couple of days later and moved Julie's body to face the door. Then Deacon asked Flo for the file of a case he had worked on before because the way Julie was found reminded him of the old case. Flo agreed to give him the file, but she made it clear that she wouldn't help with any new issues that came up. During lunch, she gave him the key to Julie's apartment so he could check out the crime scene himself. Once Deacon got to Julie's place, the landlady told him that the fridge had been busted for a month. She had called someone to fix it, but Julie got offed before they could sort it out. Looking around, Deacon got a flashback to that other murder case he worked on with Detective Sal and Captain Ferris. Deacon decided to crash at the closest inn since it was late at night. Before hitting the sack, he laid out pictures of 3 victims, including Mary, the woman Jimmy mentioned to Stan. As he stared at the photos, Deacon started picturing the 3 victims appearing before him. Captain Ferris told Jimmy at the office to stay away from Deacon and shared that 5 years ago, Deacon got transferred because he burned himself out working on a case. In just 6 months, Deacon had 3 heart surgeries, got divorced, and got suspended from the police force. Ferris also mentioned that Jimmy was brought in to replace Deacon. Plus, he said it was weird that Stan was found dead the night before. Deacon was off work, but still looking into Julie's death by going through the repair shop's book. He didn't find anything about Julie there, so he went to the shop next door and found a list of technicians who were supposed to go to Julie's place but got canceled. On the other hand, they couldn't match the fingerprints of the guy they thought did it in Julie's place because the prints were messed up in the middle. Jimmy then checked out the missing girl Rhonda's house, and her mom mentioned that Rhonda always wore a red hair clip. That night, they found a girl floating in the river, but it wasn't Rhonda. Deacon went to the crime scene and met Jimmy, who wanted to know about Mary because Stan had died after hearing that name. Deacon didn't say anything, but he gave a list of the technicians who were working near Julie's apartment. Jimmy wondered why someone as accomplished as Deacon was moved to another city instead of being promoted after 15 years in LA. But once again, Deacon didn't want to give a straight answer. The next day, Jimmy was informed by his coworker about the 3 victims from the unsolved case Deacon couldn't crack. One of them was Mary. They were all in the same line of work and were killed the same way, drugged and then stabbed. Later on at a bar, Jimmy and Deacon were talking about the case, which now had 6 victims, who were all murdered in the same way. Stabbed, mouth gagged, and hands tied. Julie was killed in her apartment, 3 others in another county, and then their bodies were dumped in Los Angeles, while the other 2 victims were killed in Los Angeles, but their bodies were found somewhere else. This means that if the same person committed all the murders, they would have put a lot of miles on their car since they traveled so much. Deacon said the killer probably did it for kicks, as all the victims were undressed but not touched. Jimmy also mentioned that Julie had roast beef in her stomach, even though she was a vegetarian. Later, Jimmy asked Deacon about his continued investigation into the deaths of Mary and the other 2 victims from the old case, even though it had been closed for 5 years. Deacon then showed Jimmy the crime scene in the dry river of Los Angeles, where the victims were found with stab wounds and their heads covered in white plastic. Deacon was with his friends, Detective Sal and Captain Ferris, at the time. The old case got shut down because they couldn't find the suspect, but Deacon wanted to look into it again because the victim in the LA case had the same condition as the one in the old case. Jimmy then mentioned that 2 folks from the list of technicians Deacon gave previously had criminal records. That evening, Deacon went to the home of Albert, one of the technicians with a criminal record. He looked at Albert's car and noticed that it had a lot of miles on it. When Albert arrived, Deacon asked him why the mileage was so high, and also wanted to check out the trunk because he saw a car brochure inside. Albert claimed that the brochure was for a different car and told Deacon not to go snooping in his trunk. Deacon acted like he was leaving. But as soon as Albert went to toss out his garbage, Deacon jumped at the chance to snoop through the trash bag. He also asked Detective Sal to look into whether Albert had recently sold his car. Deacon brought the leftover pizza from the garbage for Flo to check out. Flo noticed that the bite size matched the bite mark on Julie's body, indicating that Albert might have something with Julie's death. Deacon started to think Albert was up to something fishy, especially since there was a roast beef joint near the repair shop where Albert worked, and Julie had roast beef in her belly when she passed. Deacon kept an eye on Albert all day and caught him handing some food to a hooker by the road. The next day on the highway, Albert noticed that someone was tailing him. Instead of trying to escape, he purposely turned around on a less busy street. He then confronted the person who turned out to be Deacon, to show that he wasn't scared of him. Not long after that, Deacon heard from Jimmy that the second victim in the LA case was found near mile 467 on the highway, close to where Albert had made a U-turn earlier. Not many people knew about that U-turn, but somehow Albert did. This just made Deacon more sure that Albert was the one behind the murders. After an investigation, turns out a company found a car abandoned in Albert's name 2 weeks ago. Now Albert's been busted at home and they're gonna question him more. Meanwhile, the lady who was getting chased at the beginning of the movie, Tina, was at the cop shop reporting the chase. And just as Albert showed up, Tina got a good look at him. When the cops started asking questions, Albert didn't seem scared at all and almost like he was expecting them. He just casually mentioned that he liked reading about crime and kept up with all the news. He also mentioned that his car had been stolen and he reported it but never heard back from the cops. Then, when they showed him the pics of the LA victims, he just said he didn't do it without even flinching. Deacon was so annoyed at how calm Albert was during questioning that he almost lost his cool and wanted to rough him up, but his fellow cops stopped him just in time. Meanwhile, when Tina saw photos of the person who allegedly chased her, she immediately said it was Albert, but her statement couldn't be used because she had seen Albert get arrested before, which could have influenced her accusation. Because there was no progress in the case, Captain Ferris informed Jimmy that the FBI would be taking over in 2 days. With that in mind, Jimmy decided to go see Deacon at his place, where he still had pictures of the 3 victims from the previous case on the wall. It was then that Deacon convinced Jimmy to let him search Albert's apartment, as he was convinced that Albert was the suspect in both the LA case and the old case. Jimmy agreed, even though it meant conducting an illegal search without a warrant, since the evidence wasn't strong enough yet. Jimmy told Albert to meet him at a cafe to say sorry for what happened during the questioning, so that Albert would leave his house. Once Albert was gone, Deacon snuck into the apartment to snoop around. Inside, Deacon found a photographic darkroom, a police radio that went off whenever there was a police chase, and a box hidden under the carpet filled with women's watches and newspaper clippings about murder cases, including one about an old case. On the other hand, when he got to the cafe and Jimmy was nowhere to be found, Albert knew it was a setup and was certain that his house was being searched illegally. So, he called the cops and faked a report about an officer down in his house to catch Deacon and Jimmy in the act of doing something illegal. Deacon heard about the cops coming and bolted through the roof, narrowly escaping. The next day, Jimmy told Deacon that Albert wasn't lying about his car getting stolen, since the police forgot to write down his report. He also said that Albert went all the way to Detroit about 6 weeks after the old case 5 years ago. That explained the high mileage in his car. Jimmy and Deacon decided to keep following Albert to see what he was up to. It was weird that even though his car was working fine, Albert took a bus to a club. Nothing strange happened all day until Deacon left to go to the store. Suddenly, the payphone rang and Albert showed up. Jimmy was so surprised that he pulled out his gun and made Albert tell him where he was keeping Rhonda. Feeling threatened, Albert finally agreed to show where Rhonda was, but he said that Deacon couldn't come along. Jimmy eventually left in Albert's car. Luckily, Deacon saw them and immediately went after them. Albert seemed really shady when they got to the huge empty lot out in the middle of nowhere. He pointed out where he buried Rhonda, and then he made Jimmy dig it up. Jimmy was ready in case Albert tried anything, but it seemed like Albert was just messing with him by pretending he didn't remember where he buried her exactly. Jimmy couldn't find Rhonda's body. Then Albert said he'd never killed anyone. Jimmy kept digging where Albert pointed, but he got angry when Albert brought up his family. He ended up hitting Albert with the shovel and accidentally killing him. Shortly after, Deacon arrived and found Albert's lifeless body. He asked Jimmy to dig a deep hole for the burial, while he went to town to help sort out the situation. Deacon couldn't forget about that old case from 5 years ago. When they found the bodies, he thought he heard the perpetrator and ended up accidentally killing Mary, who was actually an eyewitness to the murder. Captain Ferris, Detective Sal, and Flo helped him cover it up, with Flo falsifying the forensic report. But ever since then, Deacon's mental state had been shaky, and it had really taken a toll on his health and family, especially since the real perpetrator was never caught and he was haunted by guilt for what happened to Mary. Deacon went to Albert's place and collected all the stuff, even the box hidden under the rug. Unfortunately, Albert had already tossed the stuff in the box before all this happened. That really sucks because it was a major piece of evidence linking him to the perpetrator of the murders. Deacon gave Albert's car to a homeless person. Then he put all the stuff in his car and went back to the empty lot to bury Albert. Even though he was pretty sure Albert was the one who did it, he told Jimmy to tell Captain Ferris that Albert had nothing to do with the case since he hadn't been declared a suspect. Deacon told Jimmy to take a vacation and act like none of this ever happened. He warned Jimmy that little things like this could mess up his life, just like they did to him. After the whole LA thing was over, Deacon was finally able to make peace with himself and let go of the old case. He left the case file in his hotel room and it got trashed by the owner. As for the LA case bad guy, they still didn't know who it was, but Deacon said that the guy they thought did it, Albert, had skipped town. Jimmy couldn't shake off the incident when he offed Albert, which always made him feel uneasy, even when he was trying to have a good time with his family. The movie ended with Deacon burning all the stuff from Albert's place to cover his tracks.